October 1991, Toulouse. Airbus rolls its newest aircraft out of the assembly hall in front of more than 5,000 airline executives and civil aviation officials. The A340. It is the first Airbus ever built with 4 engines, and Airbus tells the room it can fly further non-stop than any other civil aircraft in the world. 2 years later, the claim is tested in public. A brand new A340 leaves the Paris Air Show, flies to Auckland, sits on the ground for 5 hours, and flies straight back. More than 42 hours in the air, the longest non-stop flight ever flown by an airliner. This was the aircraft that was supposed to retire the Boeing 747 and hand Airbus the long-haul market. 21 years later, Airbus closed the line. 377 aircraft delivered to airlines. Its direct rival, the twin-engine Boeing 737, has passed 1,700 and is still selling. And here is the detail that makes the whole thing difficult to explain. Airbus did not lose that race to Boeing. Airbus lost it to another Airbus. In June 1987, Airbus launched 2 aircraft on the same day, the A340 with 4 engines, and the A330 with 2. Same wing, same fuselage, same flight deck. The A330 became one of the best-selling wide bodies ever built and is still in production in Toulouse today. The A340 stopped in 2012. So Airbus built the right answer and the wrong answer in the same factory on the same afternoon and then spent 25 years defending the wrong one. So why did Airbus keep pushing 4 engines long after its own twin was outselling it? What follows is the story of the A340 and of an argument a manufacturer kept making years after the referee had already ruled against it. To follow it, you need one set of regulations, written for piston engine airliners, that decided which aircraft was legally allowed to cross an ocean. And for most of the jet age, the question of how many engines a long-haul aircraft needed was not an economic question. It was a legal one. Under rules inherited from the 1950s, when a wide-body cost a fraction of the $100 million one commands today, a twin-engine aircraft in commercial service could never be more than 60 minutes flying time from a suitable diversion airport. That single number drew the map of global aviation. It closed the North Atlantic, the Pacific, and most of the Southern Hemisphere to twins. If an airline wanted to fly Frankfurt to Tokyo or London to Sydney, it needed 3 engines or 4. That is why the 747, the DC-10, and the L-1011 looked the way they did. But then the regulators started moving. In 1985, the FAA granted the first ETOPS approval, extended range twin-engine operations, permitting certain twins to operate up to 120 minutes from a diversion airport. TWA used it to take a Boeing 767 across the Atlantic. The approval had been written on the basis of engine reliability data, and that data kept improving. 120 minutes became 138 minutes, then 180 minutes. Airbus watched this happen and reached a conclusion that sounds reasonable and turned out to be fatal. Airbus concluded that the relaxation had a ceiling, and the reasoning was not stupid. ETOPS approvals arrived with operational restrictions, route planning constraints, and maintenance requirements that airlines would rather avoid. On genuinely long and genuinely remote routes, across the Pacific, over the poles, down through the southern oceans, an aircraft with 4 engines carried no restriction at all. It could fly the straight line. A twin had to fly the dogleg, tracking from one legal diversion field to the next, burning fuel to stay inside the rule. Putting one of these together takes weeks of research, so if this is holding your attention, hitting subscribe is the single thing that keeps the channel running. And there was a second argument, which Airbus made more quietly. Airlines and passengers, Airbus believed, would always feel safer with 4. So when Airbus finally moved to build a proper long-haul replacement for the A300, it hedged. It built both aircraft at once, June 1987. Airbus launches the A330 and the A340 together. And the commonality was deliberate and, for the time, remarkable. Same wing, same fuselage cross-section, same fly-by-wire control system inherited from the A320, and a flight deck close enough that pilots could move between the two types with minimal additional training. Airbus was offering airlines a single family that covered both sides of the argument. So the entire difference between the best-selling wide-body Airbus ever built and the worst one it ever built was not the wing, the cabin, the avionics, or the range. It was two engines. The difference was underneath the wing. The A330 got two high-thrust turbofans. The A340 got four CFM 56 engines, specifically so that it would sit outside ETOPS entirely, and a three-leg main landing gear instead of two because a 276-ton maximum takeoff weight needed somewhere to put the load. So Airbus aimed the A340 at what the industry called long, thin routes, not the dense hub-to-hub corridors where the 747 lived, but the thinner intercontinental markets where an airline needed enormous range and only moderate capacity. The A340-200 would carry 262 passengers in three classes over 14,400 kilometers at a list price then quoted near $100 million. The larger A340-300 would carry 295 over 12,500. Then the aircraft rolled out in Toulouse in October 1991 and first flew on the 25th of that month. It entered service on the 15th of March 1993, with Lufthansa and Air France taking delivery simultaneously. And for a while it did exactly what Airbus had promised. It set the Auckland record. It opened routes nobody could operate before. Governments bought it as a head-of-state aircraft because it had the range and the cabin, and it could go anywhere without asking permission from a regulator. For a few years in the mid-1990s, if an airline wanted to fly the longest routes on the planet, the A340 was genuinely the only serious way to do it. And that is precisely when Boeing arrived with the aircraft that would take all of it away. Boeing had launched the 777 in 1990. It entered service with United in 1995, and unlike every wide-body before it, it had been engineered from the first drawing to live inside the ETOPS system rather than around it. Boeing spent close to $5 billion developing it. Redundant hydraulics, redundant electrics, an auxiliary power unit certified for restart at altitude, and engines built to reliability targets that would satisfy the regulator on day one rather than after 5 years of service history. Then the rule Airbus had built its aircraft around effectively dissolved. Through the 1990s, the FAA extended ETOPS approvals to 180 minutes, and in 1997 that opened the Pacific to twin-engine operations. The dogleg mostly disappeared. On the overwhelming majority of long-haul routes an airline actually wanted to fly, a 777 could now fly the same line as an A340. And in 1997, the 700M7 took the record too. A 777-200ER flew non-stop from Seattle to Kuala Lumpur, and the longest airliner flight in the world was no longer an Airbus. That single year did more damage to the A340 than any Boeing sales campaign. Every restriction Airbus had designed its aircraft to escape had just been lifted for its competitor. The four engines were still there. The reason for them was not. But there was a second problem, and it was mechanical. The A340, 200, and 300 were powered by CFM56s, which had been chosen because they were cheap, proven, and available. They were also underpowered for the airframe. Pilots joked about the takeoff roll. More importantly, the CFM56 was near the limit of what could be developed out of it, which meant Airbus could not simply grow the A340 by turning up the thrust. And then, in June 1999, something surfaced that told Airbus exactly how the market was moving. Then Singapore Airlines announced it was swapping 17 A340-300s for 10 Boeing 777-200ERs. That alone was awkward. What made it worse was the disclosure that followed. Boeing had agreed to take those A340s back in 1995, 4 years earlier, as part of Singapore's order for 34 777s. Boeing had bought the used Airbuses in advance and simply waited. John Leahy, then Airbus's commercial director, called it an act of desperation, said a counterattack was being prepared, and added that Airbus had looked at doing the same thing in reverse and could not make a business case for it. His conclusion was that Boeing was buying market share, but he was right about the tactic. He was wrong about what it meant. Boeing was not buying market share. Boeing was buying certainty because it already knew where the arithmetic was going. Airbus's response was to build more four-engine aircraft, and the timing of that decision is the part worth pausing on. Airbus committed to the stretched A340s in June 1997. That is the same year the Pacific opened to twins. The regulator had already answered the question the A340 existed to answer, in public, and Airbus signed the check anyway. That was the exit. It was open, it was free, and Airbus walked past it. In June 1997, Airbus selected an engine for two new stretched, longer-range A340s. It had signed with General Electric the previous year, but GE demanded exclusivity on the A340, and Airbus refused, so the work went to Rolls-Royce and became the Trent 500. It first ran in May 1999 and was certified on the 15th of December 2000. By July 1999, Rolls-Royce had booked $5 billion of Trent 500 orders. And the results were spectacular aircraft. The A340-600 was, for a time, the longest airliner in the world. The A340-500 was the longest ranged, and Emirates signed a lease financing package worth $226 million for just two of them. Virgin Atlantic launched the A340-600 in 2002 at a ceremony in London with Claudia Schiffer on the wing. And in the summer of that year, at the Farnborough Air Show, Airbus put up a billboard at the edge of the runway. It read A340, 4 engines, 4 long haul, and the same line ran as full-page advertising in airshow magazines and in London daily newspapers. Airbus insisted publicly that the campaign was not about safety. Almost nobody in the industry read it that way. The obvious implication was that twin-engine aircraft, the 767 and the 787, were less safe over water. The campaign backfired in a way Airbus had not planned for. It angered the engine manufacturers who were selling engines to Airbus and Boeing alike and had no interest in a public argument about whether their products failed. Then the market answered. The deeper problem with that billboard was not that it was provocative. It was that it was answering a question airlines had stopped asking. Because by the early 2000s, the customers were not weighing safety. They were running a spreadsheet, and the spreadsheet was brutal. The 707-300ER carried a comparable payload over a comparable distance using 2 engines. Yes, each GE90 burned considerably more fuel than each Trent 500. It did not matter. 4 engines meant 4 overhaul cycles, 4 sets of line-replaceable components, 4 thrust reversers, 4 of every scheduled inspection, and a maintenance bill that never stopped compounding. Across the whole operation, the 707-300ER held an operating cost advantage over the A340-600 of somewhere between 8 and 10%. On a wide body flying 15 hours a day for 25 years, that is not a margin. That is the entire profit. And the 2 aircraft were not fighting over different missions. The A340-600 and the 777-300ER entered service within 2 years of each other, carried a comparable number of passengers, and flew the same routes for the same airlines. And there was no segment where one was necessary and the other was not. An airline choosing between them was choosing between 2 engines and 4, and nothing else on the page mattered enough to change the answer. By the early 2000s, the 777 was outselling the A340 by roughly 10 to 1. Airbus was still shipping aircraft, still filling order books, still holding launch ceremonies, but the ratio had already decided the outcome, and everyone inside both companies could read it. Airbus had spent a decade winning an argument about certification while its competitor quietly won the argument about money. And the moment the wider market stopped pretending came in October 2006. Emirates confirmed it would not take delivery of its order and options for 20 A340-600s, a deal worth around $4 billion. Emirates officials had already made clear they were unhappy with the aircraft's efficiency. That was not a rival manufacturer's opinion. That was the airline that had bought more Airbus wide-bodies than almost anyone else, walking away. Then fuel prices climbed through 2008, and the last argument for a 4-engine airliner collapsed. When kerosene is cheap, carrying 2 extra engines is an expensive habit. When it is not, it is a reason to ground the aircraft. So Airbus stopped taking A340 orders and wound the line down. The last aircraft was delivered in 2012. 380 built, 377 delivered to airlines against a rival that has passed 1,700. And the build did not stop when production did. To sell the aircraft in its final years, Airbus had guaranteed the future resale value of many A340s to its customers. When used A340 prices slid, those guarantees came due. In December 2013, Bloomberg reported that the exposure could reach $2 billion and that Airbus had gone to a meeting in London with airlines and leasing companies proposing to fit 8% more seats into existing A340s and cut their maintenance costs purely to prop up what the aircraft was worth secondhand. And Virgin Atlantic, which had launched the A340-600 with a supermodel and a press event in 2002, quietly retired the type roughly a decade later. But the replacement Airbus eventually built was the A350, twin-engine composite and aimed squarely at the market the 777 had taken. It passed the A340's entire 25-year production total within about 8 years of entering service. The A330, launched on the same day in June 1987, using the same wing and the same fuselage, is still being assembled in Toulouse nearly 40 years later. Airbus never needed to outbuild Boeing to win the long-haul market. It only needed to believe the aircraft it had already designed.